Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to yet another exciting episode of Alien Contact, where we explore cosmic mysteries. For a long time, we've been looking forward to sharing a detailed and intriguing interview we conducted with Steve Aspin. And that's exactly what I want to dive into today. This conversation promises to be quite fascinating. Steve will share his lifelong experiences with us. These shared experiences with others are what I now cherish and often refer to. Because it's not always about pleasant or harmonious encounters, it's about understanding and integrating the entire spectrum of different species and their complex interactions. You all can eagerly anticipate this incredibly fascinating and highly engaging interview with the one and only Steve, so stay tuned. After the intro, it continues.
You really want contact? Think about it.
Hello, dear ones, and a warm welcome back to Alien Contact. As mentioned in the opening, I have the pleasure of welcoming Steve Aspin again today. For those new to our show, Steve has been a guest in various insightful discussions before. Last time, we had so much to cover that we couldn't get to everything. We discussed a truly intriguing topic, a significant piece of research where Steve discovered some hair during a unique encounter and had it analyzed, which we then thoroughly explored. Today, we'll dive deeper into Steve's lifelong connection and experiences with the others. But first, for those who might not know you yet, dear Steve, welcome back to Alien Contact, and please, could you reintroduce yourself?
My name is Steve Aspin, and I'm 69 years old, and I was born in 1956 in northern England, and I moved back to northern England, or northeast England, I now live, a few years ago. And I wrote, in 2022, I wrote and published a book called Out of Time, the intergenerational abduction. It's what can't even remember. It's my book, isn't it? Program, yes. The intergenerational abduction program explored, and that sold very well, much more popular than I thought it would be when I published it. So I just realized that the alien abduction thing was happening to me in 2007. Which is when it has actually been lifelong, and all alien abductees have lifelong experiences, but they don't always identify it as that. They identify it as something else, something occult or strange, or to do with the folklore, or to do with the fairies, or they just have strange lives. And they get attracted to strange things like, the occult and religion and telepathy and ESP and so forth, and witchcraft and what have you. Or they get a very much attracted to the UFO subject, or on the contrary, they get very repelled by it and don't want to go near it. So I had all these things going on in my life, all these obsessions, all these attractions. So in 2007, when I realized that this was the thing, and I never wanted it to be happening. Nobody wants this to happen to them. I then researched it extensively, wrote maybe 80 to 100 books on the abduction subject. And I sought out and interviewed Bud Hopkins, he died in 2011, but I got to know him extremely well in the last 3 or 4 years of his life before he passed on. And I got to know Dr. David Jacobs, who was at the time a history professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. And he used to study the abduction subjects and write books which was summaries of abductee experiences. and I worked with him for 7 years. And I met a number of abductees, mainly on this side of the Atlantic, because David and Bud and people like John Mack and Ray Fowler and all these other researchers in the abduction subject. You interviewed Yvonne Smith, I understand. So they're in North America, and so any abductee on this side of the Atlantic has nowhere to go. They basically don't know who to turn to and who to confide in. So I interviewed a lot of them over the years, and their experiences are woven into my book, Out of Time.
Thank you for sharing that. It's truly fascinating to hear about the renowned personalities and scientists you've collaborated with. Your expertise in this field is clearly profound. Before we dive deeper into your research, you've mentioned that your own experiences were the catalyst for your interest. Could you tell us when exactly these experiences began for you?
Well, my experiences started about 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6, probably even before that. But most people don't remember very much before the age of 4. When they're adults, they don't remember very much. So I remember at night being awake, and suddenly I was just awake and I was paralyzed. I couldn't move anything, and there were these creatures around me. I'd never sure how many, 3, 4, 5, maybe just 3, because I learned later that they usually come in the 3s, the small ones. And there was a very not very pleasant feeling from them, and there were kind of mustiness, and I knew that they were to do with this paralysis, and I knew that I wasn't dreaming because I was wide awake. Sometimes, a street light would be shining in the window, and sometimes the moon, So I could see all of my surroundings, even though I had a room on my own as a young child. And we had a fairly medium to large house, so I was always on my own, never sharing a room. And this would go on, and I remember being sometimes felt this exhilaration, like when you go up in an elevator with, and then suddenly it slows down, and you feel light, it's a sensation of movement, and and so occasionally I remember seeing things, but my memories of those incidents are very small. And in the morning, I always remember these times, but I knew that they weren't just something that everybody experienced. Somehow I just knew that, but I thought that they weren't unique to me. Probably other people went through this, but nobody in my family. I didn't know at the time that my mother was an abductee, and my grandmother too. But I just got on with my day. And as I grew older, I became very attracted to space travel, because the 1960s was a big boom era for the space race between the US and the Soviet Union at that time. And space travel and all sci-fi, science fiction stuff coming out of the American cinema with like Lost in Space and, The Day the Earth Stood Still and stuff, where they all showed disc-shaped spacecraft like flying saucers. And then Star Trek in the late 60s came online. And I had always had a fascination and an attraction to this stuff. And many kids did anyway. I don't think it was unique to an abductee child. But then one time around about 1967, when I was 10 or 11 years old, I remember being in this transported location, wherever it was, when I was lying on my back. And I remember asking one of these entities because they speak to you in your mind. They speak to you and you hear them in your head. And it's very clear, and they have a voice. It's not like an impression, but they have a voice that you hear in your head. And I remember asking him, I framed the question and asked him, because you can, this telepathic faculties turn on in abductees. And I remember asking him, why do I need to go through this? Why do I go through this? I don't think my friends go through this, and I don't think it's unique to me. So why have I been chosen for this, or what the hell am I doing here, basically? And he said, because he had his back to me, so he's speaking telepathically to me because he was facing away from me. And he said, oh, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great-grandmother, and you're next in line. End of statement. And about 2 or 3 months later, we went to visit my grandparents because they lived about maybe 200 kilometers from where we lived at that time. And, travel in the 1960s wasn't quite as easy as it is now. The roads were not so good, and everything was a bit slow. But we go to see them in the school holidays for a week or two. And I remember being alone with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and asking her about these experiences. I just knew that because this entity had mentioned her, because I had this vision of her in my mind when he said that, because he had mentioned her, I just said to her, what is this thing, Grandma? Is these things, I think they take control of me, and I move somewhere, and in the morning, and I can't move, and they talk to me in my head, and they sometimes do things to me physically. And she said, oh, Stevie, they're just the pixies. They're just the pixies. They'll always bring you back. Don't worry. So she knew exactly about this phenomenon, but she had no idea what they were. Like, she didn't have any clue about, she was born in 1908. So she obviously, even as an adult, she had very little idea about the possibilities of space travel or aliens or, extraterrestrial life forms. But she just knew, she just called them pixies. And later I found out that when she was a little girl, which would have been 1915 or something, 1914 or something like that, in Yorkshire, she went missing for an entire day. She's maybe 6 or 7 or 8. She went missing for a whole day. And all the village community were looking for her and couldn't find her anywhere. And they did something, some kind of invocation, some kind of prayer to the fairies to bring her back, because they thought the fairies had taken her. And she turned up as the sun was going down. She just walked back into the village, and she had been away for like 10 hours or something, or 8 hours, a long time, not just an hour or so. And she had a scar on her hand there. It was like a cut from the thumb down here. And she had that all her life. And this scar appeared on that day when she went missing, when she was picking flowers in the field. So she had an association with the fairy folk or pixies being responsible for these abductions, for want of a better word. She didn't call them abductions, but she knew they would always bring you back. And she knew that they chose the time and circumstance when they would initiate this. And there was nothing you could do. You just went along with this because you had no choice. But she said to me, they'll always bring you back, don't worry. And that was the matter settled, as far as she was concerned. It was just a part of life, in the countryside. These fairies, pixies, whatever they were. So that was something that convinced me it was something to do with the ancestral line, and it was something to do with supernatural entities of some kind. And I had this in my mind until adulthood. About a year after this incident, when I asked my grandmother about this, I came across a magazine in the newsagents in 1967. It was written by Brad Steiger, who's obviously quite old now, but I think he's not passed on yet. And it was called The Flying Saucer Menace. And I was looking at this thing, and there's a photograph of is a normal size magazine, with like 100 pages in it, and a lot of photographs in it, nearly all monochrome. But on the cover photograph was a color photograph of a flying saucer over a lake, and I knew this was to do with this thing that was happening to you. Don't ask me how I knew. I just knew that this was something to do with it. I was powerfully attracted to this magazine. I had to buy it and read it and find out about it. And it was not like aimed at 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds. It was aimed at adults, who were interested in the UFO subject, which was a thing in the 1960s, because particularly in the United States, it was very culturally to the fore of the conversation, with Donald Kehoe and and all these people who were in the public domain. And the John Fuller's book about the Hill case came out in 1966, and in The Interrupted Journey. I didn't know about this, and very few people outside the US knew about this. But that was in this magazine. There was a little section, just like a paragraph in a 100-page booklet about the Hill case, and also about the Vilas Boas case in Brazil, and about the Valenceau case in France, where small, tiny little people with large heads and big eyes paralyzed a farmer. And they were asking him about his lavender crop, and it was some part of southeast France, north of Provence, near Lyon, in the Alps, foothills of the Alps. And that case was in there, and also another case in Washington State, which I can't even remember now. But these 4 cases were in there, and in this whole book, which are mainly UFO sightings and mainly tales of military pilots seeing things and people interacting with UFOs and so forth. This small section, this like half paragraph on page 84 or something, was something that I just had a nagging feeling that this was important to me. And that was all. It was only about 30 or 40 words in total, maybe 100, maybe 80 words in total. And I bought this magazine eventually because I, didn't have a lot of disposable money at age 11. But you could get pocket money every week, and I saved it and bought it. And I had it for about 25 years, and finally it fell to pieces because I read it like 100 times, and it finally got lost in a move somewhere. But I've got it. I can't show it to you now because it's in the other room. But I found another copy of it that's almost new on eBay one day when I was looking for it, and it's still around in the secondhand book and periodical market. So that was my introduction to the UFO subject as a serious, real thing which wasn't just BS, generated by the media and sensationalist movies. It was a real thing, and all these people have testified to having interacted with these things, and they've shut down electrical grid systems, and they shut down people's cars, and people had got burned when they got close to them and so forth. So it was a real thing, and with a broad spectrum of phenomena associated with it. And after that, I just knew that this was something to do with what had been happening to me, but it was still very, not, I mean, in England in 1968, 69, and probably in Germany too, the UFO issue, particularly the alien abduction issue, wasn't known about. You couldn't meet anybody who knew about it. There were probably a small cadre of people who were very interested in UFOs and as a phenomenon, that they believed it was alien spacecraft visiting the Earth and so forth. And you should go out on the hilltops and wait for the UFOs to appear and so forth. But nobody really, probably 1 in 100 people had ever heard of something called alien abduction. That's fewer than 100 people. And the people who were really interested in the UFO subjects, which was not that many in the population, particularly in the provincial part of England, which is kind of a bit of a backwater. And so when I went to Ireland in 1970, I was 14 years old. We were staying on a farm in Kerry, which is in the southwest of Ireland. But at that time, Kerry was quite old-fashioned, quite primitive. They had horse-drawn carts to go to the market and buy food and so forth. And there were cars, but not that many. And a lot of horses were used for deliveries of bread and milk and stuff, or they were using farm machinery on the farm, but not that much. And one morning after breakfast, the son of the farmer and his wife, he sidled up to me very quietly and said, "Come with me, I want to show you something." And so I got up and left the breakfast table, and I went with him. And he walked me up a hill through a gully, about 10 minutes walk from the farm, and I saw this cow obviously dead, upside down with its legs in the air. And its legs were rigid. With a cow dies normally, they just flop like that. And this cow was rigid with its legs sticking up in the air like that. And in its back end, with its sex organs and the rectum, there was a large, clean cylinder bored out into the interior of the animal, like somebody had taken a great big drill or a cutting thing and made a completely cylindrical hole into the animal. And a part of its jaw was cut away, so the jawbone was visible, and one of its eye sockets was empty and the eye has been cut out with like a great big ice cream coop, and one of its ears had been cut off. And this kid told me, with his father nearby, that the vet had already been that morning because they'd summoned the vet. And the vet had told the farmer and the family, that it was anthrax. And you probably know anthrax is a spore-based organism. I didn't know anything about it when I was 11 or 12. Sorry, I was 14. But it's a spore-based organism, and it's really dangerous. Now, it stays in the soil for years. And if you found an animal that was killed by anthrax in any part of Europe in 1970, you would have had the whole region would have been evacuated and locked down, so that it could be decontaminated. No such action was taken. So I can only think that the vet himself did not believe that it was anthrax, but they had to tell the farmer something, and that's what they told him. It was anthrax. And I'd absolutely nothing to connect this horrific image to, because I walked around this cow, and they said that the farm dog wouldn't go near it, and there was no blood on the ground anywhere, and there was no sign of another animal having attacked it. It was just it was like it had been dropped from the air, like from 100 meters up, and it hit the ground, and it just its legs were like that. It's completely all sticking up from the and it's lying on its back with its legs rigid, and with all these horrific mutilations. And again, I had a feeling that this was something that I was somehow supposed to see. It's very difficult to explain why. This kid just chose me of all the guests staying in the farm to go and see this thing. Nobody else. My sister was staying, was approximately the same age as me. She was staying in the farm as well with us, obviously, and she wasn't part of this. She wasn't shown this, and I was told not to mention it to any of the other guests, and I didn't mention it to the other guests because obviously it was something I would find impossible to describe, or if I just described it and nobody else could see it, they wouldn't believe me because it was so horrific and awful. This thing that happened on the farm, 200 meters from where I was stuck, a few hundred meters from where I was sleeping. And they had never had anything like this before. And no such incident had ever occurred on any neighboring farm. It was completely unknown, this phenomenon. This was in 1970. And it was in the 1980s that Linda Howe did her TV show on Strange Harvest. It went out on network television because there was no internet then. And it was called A Strange Harvest, and it was about identical cattle mutilations all over the agricultural states, and Montana and Wyoming, and all these places in the west of the US, where there's millions of cows, and other animals too, like horses, and suffered this thing, and she exposed it into the public domain with a TV documentary, and it catapulted her to a kind of international notoriety. So this cattle mutilation and the nighttime incidents and the UFO magazine and these things, I knew that somehow they were all to do with each other, but I didn't really understand anything other than that. I just had this weird thing. Why have all this weird, strange stuff keep happening to me? What have I done to get?
Exactly. You mentioned that your grandmother recounted her experiences to you, but that these experiences actually originated with your great-grandmother. What was particularly interesting was how your great-grandmother described these encounters with others. She referred to them as pixies or fairies. This choice of terminology makes sense given the era, as there were no books or films about greys or other extraterrestrials then, so no established language for such phenomena. My question is, did you have direct contact with your great-grandmother, or did your grandmother relay her mother's experiences to you?
Yeah, my great-grandmother was still alive when I was very small, and she was the only great-grandparent out of 8, isn't it? You've got the 8 great-grandparents. She was the only one still alive when I was born, and she died when I was about 6 in 1963 or 4, I think. And I found her, was the first one to find her lying on the floor because she lived very close to my grandmother. But I never had any kind of interaction with her about this phenomenon. And I don't believe my grandmother, that's her daughter, ever talks about it with her, although she would have been obviously a witness to this incident when my grandmother went missing for a day in the field collecting flowers. She would have obviously been involved in that because it was her daughter, and she went, so she'd have a memory of that, but I don't think she ever discussed this with me, because at age 5 or 6 I just really knew nothing about it. I just had these nighttime experiences sometimes that I didn't connect to anything. So no, my great-grandmother, I think I studied this intensely, talked to David Jacobs about it and talked to other abduction researchers about it. And I think that the origin abductees, the first people to be recruited into the program, were sometime between 1880 and 1900, probably around about 1890. And there's a lot of evidence that this is so, but it's very deep and complicated to go into on a podcast interview. But in my book, in chapter 8 and 9, I do explore this quite deeply. So I've put everything down in writing. And I think my grandmother, my great-grandmother, who was born in 1873, she would have been, in 1890, she would have been 17. And no, she, well, it's 1873. Yes, she would have been 17 in 1890. And I cite another abductee who was recruited into the program in around about 1890 or the early 1890s, and is in Turkey. He lived in Turkey, and he was a young teacher at Istanbul University. And I write his story out of time, because I got to know one of his family, one of his descendants, who has written about it in extensively. And I think the origin abductees started in this program as young adults, not as babies. As young adults, the first generation of abductees were young adults, in the prime of life, about to start the breeding cycle, about to marry and have kids. And there's a lot of evidence for that. And thereafter, their descendants and their descendants and their descendants were in the program. That's how it's worked over the years. And we can speculate endlessly about what they're doing and why it's so important to the abductors that they have some kind of genetic continuity in this program. But one thing we can be absolutely certain about, because the evidence for this is overwhelming, is that it is an intergenerational program. This is planned in by the abductors from the beginning. So I think the first generation of abductees, around about 1890 or 1890, between 1880 and 1900, were chosen as young adults, just about to start the breeding cycle, just about to get married, because people got married quite young in those days, mostly quite young in those days. And they were all about that age when they were recruited into the program. And how they were chosen, nobody has any idea. People speculate about this, and there's a lot of folklore about it, and a lot of witness testimony about it, but we don't really know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm currently immersed in writing my book, tentatively titled Alien Contactee. This narrative will recount my story, supported by intense research, as my commitment to crafting a substantial and intriguing tale grows. I often reflect on how certain narratives, like Don Quixote, become embedded in our cultural history or stem from inherent traditions, even when their deeper meaning is elusive. This makes me consider how extraordinary events are interpreted and recorded. For instance, it's even alleged that Goethe once witnessed an unidentified flying object. It seems we may not fully grasp how long this phenomenon has been present, or how it's been understood, or perhaps even managed, by various leadership structures throughout history. This is precisely what makes this research so intriguing and thought-provoking.
The UFO phenomenon is ancient. Wherever they're from, they've been showing up for centuries, maybe millennia, who knows. But this particular program, this abduction program, the latest one anyway, seems to have started around about the 1890s. This is a specific thing. The alien abduction thing is a specific thing. It's a planned program of a small percentage of the human population, and it's global, it's worldwide, and it's intergenerational, and it's secretive. They want to keep it. They want to wipe people's memories so they don't remember what's happened to them. And the abductions program is repeated. Many people have many abductions every year, and they don't remember most of them, or almost don't remember most of them. But this specific thing that I write about is not the UFO phenomenon in general. It's a very specific part of it, but it's quite a big part of it, because it's how most people who are interacting with it in an extremely close way and are involved with it against their will or without their consent. This is, you can time it, the onset of a specific program, intergenerational program, as being about 130, 140 years ago. And there is a reason why they want genetic continuity, and we don't really understand exactly what it is. But it's obviously important.
I'm very interested to revisit something we discussed earlier. You mentioned experiencing nosebleeds. Can you recall if this phenomenon also occurred during your childhood?
Yes, it happened to me. It's happened to most kids in the program. But for me, the major series of number of years when it happened was when it was 7, 8, 9, 10, and the school invited or asked my parents to come into the school to discuss this, because my nose was bleeding during the lessons on the desk and on the paper, and they couldn't stop it. And this was very regular for a while. And then my parents took me to an ENT specialist, ear, nose and throat specialist. And I can't remember, and they examined me, and I can't remember any firm diagnosis being reached, because they found it really mysterious. And maybe they'd come across it before and they didn't know what it was. And I'm afraid at that time, in the 1960s, they just said, oh, some kids have nosebleeds, and if eventually it will resolve and they'll stop. And they did. So the doctor was right, but he didn't really know what it was. He didn't really understand it. I mean, you can't explain a nosebleed in a child, a persistent nosebleed repeatedly in a child, as, oh, a lot of kids go through this and we don't know why, because there's a reason. Oh. And it happens to me in adult life too, but very much less frequently. And the last time was in 2022.
Yeah, you have explained it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought I had a feeling of this as an adult. So it's very rare as an adult I've had these, but this I have had them. Something up here in the nasal pharynx, and the areas the cribriform plates, which is where the olfactory nerve goes into the brain. That's where they put these implants, and they put them in through your nostril, and they have an instrument to do that. And I had this feeling something was loose in there, and I went like that, and I felt a kind of something going into my throat, and I was going to swallow it. Oh, and maybe it went into the trachea. And after like 30 seconds, I just did a really small cough. I was in the bathroom and just did that was it. And the big clot came out with a little object in the middle of it, hard little object in the middle of it, and splattered on the sink, on the wash basin. And I had an irresistible urge to wash it down with tons and tons of gallons of water, just ran the tap. I rationalized it to myself that if my wife sees I'm coughing up blood like that, she will have me straight down the emergency room. and we have a hell of a night, But I had this knowing that it wasn't something that the medical fraternity could do anything about. And furthermore, that it wasn't indicative of any pathology. I just knew that. And I did notice a change in my mood and a change in my energy levels after I coughed this thing out. And about 5 or 6 weeks later, in April, I woke up. Oh, there's more actually to this. The bleeding went on for 24 hours, but after about 2 hours, it stopped dripping, and I had to push tissue rolled into a cylinder up the nostril really high, and it was bloody on both sides, and after 24 hours it stopped. But about 5 or 6 weeks later, I woke up extremely agitated and irritated, and with this pain up here, really, really nasty pain, like somebody just been stabbing me up here. And again, I had the nosebleed, and I think they put it back. And there was I write in the book about one of these implants that was taken not out of an abductee's nose, but in a different part of his anatomy, and it was analyzed by neutron star nanotechnology in California. And this thing was it's the size of a very, very small grain of wheat, and it was broadcasting radio signals in three frequencies, and 4 or 5 weeks following being taken out of the abductee's body, these signals stopped, and that's quite a long time for something to keep on broadcasting, something that small, but they stopped. And I think that's what, in this case, this incident in 2022, that's what happened when the abductees noticed that it was gone when it stopped transmitting. So another abduction was initiated and they put it back, or the new one, put a new one in. So these are all really strange things, but abductees have these instances all the time. They explain them. If they don't know what's happening to them, they don't connect it to the abduction phenomenon. They just think they have really strange lives. They have strange pathologies, and they have nosebleeds, and they have mysterious illnesses where they get feverish, or they have strange headaches. Have all this. So a lot of people were unaware that they're in this program. They have all these things happen to them, and they just think, I'm just so tired all the time, and I have this pain in this head every so often, and I just don't seem to be able to deal with it. The medicine doesn't cure it, and I just don't know, and they just kind of live with it, or just dismiss it. But I've been fortunate in that I did work out what the source of this was. It doesn't make a great deal of difference, but it does mean that you have something to hang it on, something to nosebleeds are very common with abductees, especially as children. Some abductees don't have any nosebleeds, but they're a minority. But most do as kids. But as adults, not often, or very, very rarely, but they still have them. And this is one of the sites just here that they put them in. They put these implants in. They're tiny little implants.
I have another question for you, but perhaps you have another intriguing or memorable experience you'd like to share first.
Not the last couple of years have been very quiet, but I'm 69 now. Up until I was about 65, I'd had regular incidents, but not very often. Not very often remembered. And there's a couple I report in out of time that are quite detailed. But last 2 years, I remember nothing at all. I mean, I may have been abducted, but I remember nothing at all. A lot of abductees who get into their 60s and 70s, they tell me that they think the abductions have completely stopped. And it may be that they're no further use to the program. If they can't get, like, sperm production declines, and seminal fluid declines, and the guys' prostates enlarge as they're in their 60s very often, and women's reproductive cycle really stops in their 50s. And so it may be that when you reach a certain age, they cease to be of use to the program. So the abductions either stop altogether or they become very infrequent. I mean, a lot of abductees have told me this, when they reach 60, they just basically were left alone.
Did you have any further experiences during your years between 30 and 50?
In my 30s and 40s, I don't remember seeing UFOs overtly. There's several when I was young, which I've described in Out of Time. But I definitely had some abduction experiences. As an example, in when would it be? 2008, August 2008. So I was 52. That's not in my. She was already 52. I had an abduction event. I was abducted twice on 2 consecutive nights in August 2008, and I remember being transported up out of the house, and I remember 3 little greys around me. One is just above me there. I could always reach out and touch it. And another one was just behind me, below me. And another one was right in front of me. And I remember as I looked at him, or it or her, because they have gender, they don't have any sex organs. As I looked, I could suddenly, I wasn't looking at a grey alien. I was looking at a relative of mine who was that time was 6 years old, and she had long curly blonde hair, and she's part of the bloodline, but I don't know if she was an abductee, but they knew what she looked like, so they got her image from my mind, or else she's in the program. I haven't really discussed it with her. That's another story. But she was smiling, and she was in a night dress, and she had this long blonde hair, and she had this fixed smiling expression. And as I put my hand out to touch her, it went right through this image, this holographic image, and I felt a skinny, cold torso of one of these aliens, and I could feel its fear and anxiety as I grabbed hold of it. And that's all I remember. But the rest of the abduction is wiped from memory. But I do remember specifically that. The next morning, by the way, I got in the shower, and the woman is now my wife. I wasn't married to her at the time, but we were living together. When I got out of the shower, she said, "Steve, what's that on your shoulder?" That's one of those scoop marks I've seen in books about UFO abductions, and you've got one. It's really fresh. And she was right. I had this big scoop mark on my shoulder from that same incident that I've described about the grey alien disguising itself as a little girl. And they took a scoop mark on that abduction as well. So there's different reference points to the abduction, not just one thing, but different things. And this scoop mark biopsy, this scoop marker, it says they're like the size of your fingernail, and they're like a very small ice cream scoop has been dug into your flesh and then brought together. So they're usually a circle of like a moon crater, a very, very small one, with a line across the middle where the flesh has been taken out and they've been reunited and fused, and it's completely healed, more or less completely healed. So there's no blood, there's no pain, there's nothing. So they have technology that somehow can heal human tissue very, very rapidly when they want to. And this scoop mark was biopsied in a Manhattan dermatology clinic. And it was paid for by Breakthrough Films, who at that time were making a film about Bud Hopkins and his work. And he was asked by the film company if he could find a couple of abductees with fresh scoop marks that had never been looked at or investigated. And it just happened that my wife photographed it with maybe a cell phone, can't remember, maybe a camera, because this was like almost 20 years ago. Phone cameras weren't all that common, which they are now. She sent the photographs to a couple of people in North America she knew of. And Bud Hopkins actually telephoned me at home in my house in Hertfordshire. One evening, she telephoned me and asked me if I'd go over to Manhattan in the next few weeks and have this biopsied in a clinic. And he invited me to stay at his apartment. He had an apartment and studio complex in Manhattan. And that's the account of that is in Out of Time as well, because we became very good friends for a number of years after that. I mean, for a number of reasons, not just this scoop marker, because we saw eye to eye on many things. So that was a bit of luck, if you like, being in the right place in the right time. My wife finding the scoop mark scar, photographing it, and film company making a film of Bud Hopkins' life, who asked him to find scoop marks on abductees somewhere, and he was sent photographs of this guy in England who'd got one on his shoulder, and he decided to phone me up. So that's how our relationship began to develop. So that was in 2008. So I was 52 then. So the abductions were going on then, and they still went into my 60s, because we've lived here 7 years, and when we've been here about 2 years, I would have moved here when I was 62. When I was about 64 or 65, that's before I started writing Out of Time, or before I was bullied into writing it, which I was by my wife and a few friends. Before that, one night I woke up about dead of night, about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. It was in the winter, so it was pitch black, dark, and I felt my hand was wet and sticky. So I got up out of bed and went to the kitchen, which is a room a couple of doors away, and put the light on and looked at it, and there were 3 puncture marks in the shape of an equilateral triangle. 1, 2, 3, just like an equilateral triangle. And on the back of my hand, where the thumb joint it makes the hand, and it bled for a few minutes, and then I kept wiping it, and I didn't have the presence of mind because I was really tired, really sleepy. I mean, if I've just been abducted, you're really, really sleepy. You want to just go on sleeping. And I didn't have the presence of mind to photograph it. And in the morning, it all scabbed over and formed a single scab over the 3 incisions. So that happened when I was about 64. So, and then there was the in 2022 incident when this thing was coughed out of the nose. So abductions do continue into your 60s. In my case, they did, but I'm not sure that they're still continuing over the last couple of years. They might be, but I've had no memory of any incident in the past 2 years.
First, I want to express my sincere gratitude to you, Steve, for taking the time to share your invaluable insights and experiences with us today. It has been truly captivating and deeply appreciated. My thanks also extend to all our viewers for their continued support. This episode will be available fully in English and, of course, with a complete German translation. This ensures accessibility for all, especially for those who, like me, might find direct conversation in English challenging, despite understanding the content. I am particularly grateful to our dedicated translator, who has once again skillfully facilitated our conversation today. While Steve and I share a mutual understanding, his German comprehension mirroring my English grasp, the translator ensures seamless communication for everyone. Finally, Steve, thank you once more for everything. We wish you all the very best and hope to stay in touch for a potential future interview. To our audience, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye and take care.
Thank you immensely for your presence today. Beloved ones, the complete videos are now exclusively accessible for members only. This implies that you can view the full versions of my videos, enjoy bonus material, and a plethora of other exclusive content solely with a premium subscription. This decision stems from my desire to provide you with even more content and to support my work. I am confident that you will relish the supplementary content. Heartfelt thanks for your understanding. Until next time here at Alien Contact.